I went to see my dermatologist to do my annual skin checkup, and then I engaged in a conversation with him about skin pigmentation, and training of dermatologists in the field of dermatology. And let's talk about how there are many people in the field of dermatology who are saying to themselves, we really need to think about revamping this field. There are a lot of things. We're falling short in many ways. And so there are many people in the field who are pushing to open some things up to have a different kind of conversation about skin, and in particular, light skin and dark skin. And so I thought, hey, after I put everything together, all of my thinking about how I would present this to you, I think I have an incredibly reasonable way of approaching this, in a very reasonable way of talking about it with you. And I think it's about as reasonable as I could ever imagine having. I'm 62 years old. I've been around the block a long time. Sometimes I can be a little bit out of touch. If I could get two of you to come sit here and just help, just observe, listen to what I'm saying, I can go back to the three of you and say, okay, how is that? What did you hear? How am I being fair? Am I missing something, right? I'm talking about a part of this, a piece of this issue that we're going to talk about today. I'm going to make the argument that in the field of dermatology, we should see color. People with more darkly pigmented skin, they contract melanoma at a rate of like 1 per 100,000. People with lighter skin, this is just in the United States, it's 30 to 100,000, okay? Okay, that's fine. That's just skin. That has nothing to do with any with human intervention. That's all about God or evolutionary process or whatever you want to say, right? So if that's an issue that people with light skin like me have to take up with the Creator to say, hey, man, what's going on here? But it's about the survival rate. And in medicine, it's so often about the survival rate. Once you have an operation, or once you contract some disease or something that you come up against, what's the likelihood that you're going to survive? And this includes being treated, so with different body types, but also like whether you get treated or not. So in this case, there are a lot of things that go into people with darker skin having a lower survival rate than people with light skin. What do you take from that? What's the problem? What's the cause?
I think it's also because of the fact that, and we've touched on this, that there isn't much research in this specific field as far as dark-skinned individuals are concerned, just because that standard baseline was established at this one point. So maybe any standard research or some paper that comes out is done by keeping in mind that your general population is going to be light-skinned, and that is why you may or may not have a lot of ways to treat people who have dark skin and have skin cancer, as we're talking about.
Okay, so Kylie, so you see that headline, 5-year survival rate. It's, considerably lower. Where's your brain go? Where's your mind go? What are your thoughts?
I get the same thing what he said is like what we talked about last class. You told us about the nurse that they weren't taught how to find a vein in a colored person, and just like a white person, she had to figure it out herself. Yep. So I think it's just the lack of research and understanding of how to care for people with different skin colors.
How to think about those things.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
Well, in the past, they actually used to use black people as experiments when it comes to medical experiments, because they thought that we had a lesser pain tolerance. Yeah. So I feel like that did trickle down into today, and where a lot of doctors and stuff don't believe us as much when we complain about certain health issues.
Oh, okay. All right. So I might go to you and say, hey, I'm having this problem with my skin. They look at it. I talked about maybe there's a rash and they don't see the rash because they're not trained in how to see the rash, and then they disregard it, and that rash becomes something that's much more dangerous and that kind of thing. In this world, of science. Science is all about, whether it's social science or biology or chemistry or physics or anything, it's all about causality. We want to know causality, okay? So once diagnosed with a melanoma, dark-skinned people have a lower survival rate than light-skinned people, white people, okay? What's the cause? What's the cause? We go right there. If you have a more of a racial activist bent, right, you're going to see the cause as somehow outside of black people themselves. And you're probably going to see the cause as much more like white people, like as you implied, as all three of you implied, really. And if you have a more of a different kind of perspective, like saying, well, I'm not really oriented toward thinking about the system, toward thinking about like racism and the ways in which people have systematically created these unequal relationships between groups of people, then I'm going to think, where am I going to look for the cause?
Science? But how could
I'm going to look at it. Okay, go ahead.
But how could you not consider the system?
How could you not consider the system? Well, I guess you wouldn't consider the system. How do you think you could not consider the system?
Privilege.
Privilege? Meaning you have the privilege to not
ignore those things, or they probably don't affect you as much.
Okay.
So you just don't think about it.
Okay.
But it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist.
What do you think about what she just said about the privilege? I
agree. I'm not going to act like it isn't a thing, like white privilege and everything. But I also feel like it's not talked about a lot. I think people would rather just ignore it and not see it and just accept the privilege that they have rather than do something about it.
Mm. Okay, so white privilege is one of these buzzwords. Right? There are a lot of people, not just white people, but black and brown people also, that they're tired of talking about privilege, white privilege. It's like there are many people in this class who don't feel, you're white, you don't feel privileged. And in many, obviously, and we're going to talk about this, we're only at the very beginning of the semester, we're going to talk about class, and we're going to, all the ways in which many white people here, on the basis of many factors, are not privileged at all. Come on. And there are many black and brown people in here who are far more privileged than white people on the basis of many different variables, okay? But you raised it, and you said in this case, though, it feels like there's a certain white privilege, okay? Are you in agreement with that?
I sort of disagree with it.
Dude.
You're
doing your job. Okay.
I think personally, from what I've seen, the idea of privilege, as you said, this word is used a lot. I think in this case, or in general, in most cases, what we see as being a person of color myself, and things I've seen around, most cases it's people who are underprivileged and who do not have certain things, certain needs. And because of that, they suffer. But that does not necessarily mean that the person who is not in that situation is privileged. So, we were talking about that standard baseline. So, for example, if something similar is happening for, let's say, a group of people, and let's say 3 of them do not get certain things or do not meet certain criteria or whatever, then that doesn't mean that the whole group, other than those three people, are privileged. What I would consider is that those 3 people are underprivileged, and we need to uplift them, and that's where that equity thing is, involved. That's what my fair idea goes into that picture.
Okay, all right, that's fair. I like that.
I said it was a privilege to not consider the system, though.
A privilege to not consider the system, which is a really good point. Yep, it's a certain privilege, right? And by the way, when I hear a lot of black and brown people talk about white privilege, what I'm actually hearing them say is that not just that all white people have privilege. I mean, sometimes people say that. And sometimes I roll my eyes at that. I'm like, the people that are going to clean this room, for example, and they're not getting paid a lot of money, I would be hard-pressed to ask some of those of you who are black and brown to come in here and just wait in the room when they show up to clean, and explain to them how it is that they have privilege compared to you. those of you who are driving, like really nice cars and all sorts of things, right? Just engage them in conversation and see if you can convince them that they have privilege. Just as a thought. That is a thought experiment, right? And if you're one of these people that very quickly says, throws around white privilege and white people have privilege, I said, well, I would challenge you to do that. So anyway, that's just a thought. Okay. Yeah.
I disagree with that. I think that
Wait, what do you disagree with?
The analogy that you gave, the thing that come at after the class or later and talk to those people and see where that privilege plays out. I think if you're considering these two scenarios where we're comparing ourselves to them, we can't really talk about privilege there because it's more of a class thing than a race thing.
Okay.
So, for example, if we consider two people who do not have education qualifications, who are both qualified to do minimum wage jobs these that we talked about. And in that category, we talk about a person of color, or a person who's black, and a person who's white. Then we could talk about privilege. Okay, that white person got that job, then that person might have that privilege. But between us as students, it's not about more like privilege. We could be brown, black, white, but we come from money. They do not, and that's why they're doing that job. So they would not feel that privilege. So I think sometimes it also depends on the context of the situation.
Okay, listen, 100% agree. I 100% agree with you. What I was referencing was what I hear sometimes, especially students who are much more on the liberal left. Students, but older people as well. But I'm just engaging with young people who will throw around a term like white privilege, just as though it's like they're drinking water or something. White privilege, and that's white privilege, and this is white privilege, and that's white privilege, and they throw it around really recklessly and carelessly. And so those are the folks that I'm challenging to see it more nuanced in the way that you were doing.